Morning, everybody. Just waiting for our numbers to stabilize as they are still rising. And just give it another few seconds here. Okay, welcome everybody to the April Spotlight, April Fool's Day. No witty joke for me. This is real life. No April Fool's joke. We're all here. Wanted to give everybody a few updates. I can mention about the search process for the AVP of OSP. Irmela is going to join us to give a post-award staffing update. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing at the federal level, at a high level, as well as some updates on sort of basic trends and the process that we're developing sort of on the fly as it relates to terminations and stop work orders. Some of the mechanics in Huron/Workday, some of the communication pieces, and some of the details and lessons learned that we've seen from some of our existing terminations and stop work orders. And then a few research UVA related updates on there was a recent change relative to the research security office that Stephen's going to give us an update on, and Erica and Jamie are going to give some updates on future enhancements to research UVA and some other system related updates. So I'll kick it off with the AVP of OSP search update. We've interviewed the interviewed candidates within OSP and research. Sorry, the OSP leadership team has interviewed candidates, and I know some other folks in leadership positions across the field, as well as the search committee, have completed the interviews, provided feedback, and my understanding is that process is progressing along. So hope to have an announcement on that soon. So look to the VPR's office for any future updates on that. But excited to go through the process and yeah, excited to hear what shakes out of that. On other staffing fronts, Irma, I'll hand it over to you for a post-award update.
Hi, everybody. I just want to give you an update on Garrett's team that I'm currently overseeing. So we had an open position within Garrett's team to replace Ebony Turner, who used to support School of Engineering. So we are really happy to announce that Grace Agunu has been hired for that position. Grace comes with many years of research administration experience. And Grace, if you're on the call, if you can just say hi to everybody, that would be great. Is Grace on the call?
She's at a doctor's appointment.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Christine. And then Katina has also successfully hired a replacement for Angie Michael's position. Katina, I will hand it off to you to introduce Louis to the group and also to talk about our cash flow report that we are closely monitoring. And Bill, I think Katina will need to share her screen. So if you can just give her the access. Katina, if you can take it over, please.
Sure, absolutely. Louis, I think Louis is on the call. Louis can say hello. He came from us from the private industry, so we're excited to get his perspective. He has clinical trial background, 20 plus years. So Louis started with us January temping, and he's official now. So he's officially part of our team. So we're full on the cash side of post award. We are actually full. So we don't have any current open positions for that. So we like to say welcome again, Lois. So I will share real quick. So in lieu of everything that's going on in the climate of the federal government, so we have been developing some cash management um, reports just so that we can get trends. We can, make sure that what we're seeing, what we think we're seeing, and do a comparison to prior. We're trying to run them on a 12-month basis to do, what happened in 24 versus what's happened in 24 on our federal side. We also do this across the board for non-federal, but for this exercise and what we're primarily looking at and updating basically on a weekly process now is just the federal piece of it. So I'm going to share, this is a really high level, but it does capture the things that we're trying to look at regarding federal payments and federal invoicing. Okay, can everyone see my Excel sheet? Okay, so again, this is a pretty simplified, but it does capture what we're looking for. So we're running against our federal sponsors. So anything that has federal is coded as a federal fund source. We're pulling in our revenue expenses and seeing what they're averaging out for each month to see if we see any trends there. Everything seems to be pretty consistent across the board. We haven't seen any major jumps except for the normal ones that we see. And I'll touch on those in just a second too. So the other items that we're capturing is what payments are we getting monthly? Are we corresponding? Are we collecting federal payments at the same consistency month after month? Do we have any lags? Do we have any concerns that we would consider to be abnormal? We're looking at all federal invoicing, and then we're breaking that out by letter of credit. And the reason we're breaking that out by letter of credit is because letter of credit is our primary federal draws, federal reimbursements that we do, because such a large percentage of our awards are letter of credit. We're specializing in those, and we've increased our draw amounts. Not sorry, we've increased our frequency of our draws to correspond with payroll runs as well as any other frequencies that we might see a fluctuation of that we need to do a earlier collection of cash. So we may have done a letter of credit draw twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month. We're doing them almost on a weekly basis on some of our larger federal sponsors, just so that we can be prepared for any trend that might happen or any new change that might happen that we are all seeing from day to day. So and what we pull these from is just we're just pulling this from our federal ledger for our grants and contracts revenue. Again, and these other items are just coming out of our Tableau reports that are giving us what we're generating and invoicing and payments that are coming in. So we'll point out that you can see like July has a little bit of an increase and it's above our average, as well as you can see January is also for expenses and revenue. This is common. We don't consider this to be an abnormal trend. Typically in July, we see a bump because of year-end close that happens in June. There's a lot of transactions that just can't get processed because systems are cut off early and shut down. So we tend to see a little bit of an increase in July. So this was expected. Same similar thing happens in January. This typically has come because January is, a big holiday month. A lot of people are out of the office. Things slow down a little bit. So we have a tendency to see a little bit of a bump in January. Just happened to be this year that bump happened we had some systems that shut down, as many of you are aware of. We were trying to do our letter of credit draw with the payment management system. We got held up and we couldn't get all those draws in. So a lot of those didn't get pushed over until February. But I will tell you that our draws have been consistent. They're paying on a timely basis, very similar to everything that we've seen over the last year. We have one sponsor, and it's a small sponsor. It's Department of State is the only one, and it's only about 21,000 that we're seeing that we're having a little bit of a lag time on collecting payments for. So we've been happy to see that. We're continuing to schedule our draws around some payroll runs. So we're trying to time that as best we can. Most draws will take a day to 3 days to collect payment on. So, we're trying to schedule if we have a biweekly run on Wednesday, if we can run our payroll on Thursday and we can collect our payment on Friday to Monday. That butts up a little bit of month end. So you can see that trend a little bit here in March, where our letter of credit invoicing is a little bit less, and a lot of that is due to the month-end payroll. So we captured both biweekly payrolls in our runs because we ran our last letter of credit draws on the 27th, but the monthly payroll didn't complete until the 28th. So we're running letter of credit again today. So we will capture those in today's runs so that we have everything for quarter end completed. So this is just a high level. We're tweaking this a little bit, changing it as we go week to week, month to month, to see any trends or anything that we need to maybe investigate, look into. We have several other reports that we run with this. We have some reports that shows us what potential billing we have out there for our letter credit and our non-letter credit awards. So anything that may have been completed and what we consider to be ready to bill, meaning it's gone through all the approval processes and the settlement processes. So we run that in comparison with our letter of credit runs, just to make sure there's nothing we're missing or that we need to investigate on some high levels or low levels of expensing. Any questions?
So Katina, just want to ask you, uh, we are expecting to see a little downward trend in expenses or slash revenue. So February looks little low, but not alarming. March looks pretty standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
On
Yeah, they're all
average,
averaging out. We haven't seen huge,
drops in our expense.
because again, a lot of these you have to look at it with a little bit of timing in mind when you think about it, because part of when I say LOC is the large part of our billings, it really is. It's a large component of our federal billing, but we also have what we consider to be manual or billable invoicing that comes in with federal too. And typically that doesn't have the same turnaround time as a letter of credit. So those revenues and expenses will post, say, in April, but we wouldn't actually generate the billable invoices to send out to the sponsors until May. So some timing, letter of credit is the exception to that. For the most part, we do have a little bit of those trends at month end, but for letter of credit, we run throughout the month and we get an immediate payment. That is not the case with anything that's non-letter of credit because it goes through the normal billable process. Typically, you bill after month end close, and most of our sponsors pay us on an average of a 60-day net turnaround. Some are earlier, some are later, just depends. But 60 days is a good rule of thumb for them. Anything else from anyone? This is such exciting stuff. I know. All right. I will
Thank you.
hand it off.
Okay, great. Thanks, Katina. Nothing else for you, Romola?
No, I'm good. I just want to mention to everybody that we are tracking our expenses very carefully because of the stop work orders and termination notices. We are expecting to see a slightly decrease in our expenses, but haven't seen anything as yet. So that's the message for everybody, and we are collecting money as quickly as possible. So nothing is really being held up besides Department of State, that $21,000.
Great. Yeah, I think it's really important to sort of see some of that big picture. And yeah, we can talk a little bit about some of the terminations and stop work orders, but I think it's also really important to emphasize that those there's sort of not been widespread impact on those to date, in terms of our overall financial picture. Obviously, it's a fluid situation, and things can change. But I think on the transitioning from that, I just want to give a couple updates on a lot of folks have had questions about sort of some of the NIH notice about the 15% indirect rate that's been bouncing around in the courts. And March 5th, Judge Kelly in the district court in Massachusetts issued a preliminary injunction that essentially prevents nationwide that indirect cost limitation from being used. There's a 60-day appeal by which the federal government can appeal that ruling. I've heard speculation at Koger calls and from some of the lawyers that have not been directly involved in the case but are following closely that they expect the federal government to appeal. But where it goes from there, it would go to the First Circuit Court of Appeals for review, and then could potentially go up to the Supreme Court depending on that ruling. But that's the legal process will play out over time with regards to that ruling, but the preliminary injunction is in place until further notice. So I think that's the key takeaway. We are still using our negotiated indirect rate, as are all universities, and so I think that's the key takeaway for everybody at the practical level. And we'll see where that lands. I think as well, we're tracking and looking at future spending bills that could impact this. We're under a continuing resolution until the end of the federal fiscal year, but future spending bills for future years could change some of that. Some of the authorizing statutes that allow or don't allow the federal government to use that indirect cost rate. So it's kind of a wait and see on where that lands. But just wanted to give an update on some of the court cases there. I think in terms of stop work orders and terminations, we've seen, I'd say, a handful or less of them. And we have some lessons learned, and we've been talking to our colleagues at other universities, how they're managing these situations. I think at a high level, if I were to characterize sort of what we've seen in the past weeks since the new administration, I would say there was an initial phase of a lot of stop work orders that were flying around all over the place as the executive orders were being implemented. And there was a lot of questions about, does this stop work order apply to us in general? How does it apply to existing awards? And our guidance has been throughout that if we have an existing award, you comply with the regulations and terms and conditions of that particular existing award until you receive a award specific stop work or termination. And that's what we've been proceeding on ever since January. We've sort of transitioned into what I would characterize as a slightly different phase of less stop work orders that are implementing executive orders and more terminations that are just an outright termination of an award. Like I said, we have not seen very many of them, but it is noteworthy, and what we're hearing from our colleagues at other universities that there has been a distinct shift in terms of what what they're seeing. A lot of these terminations are coming from DHHS, and it's also notable that there's not really been much in the way of terminations from NSF. I think, at a high level, both of those are noteworthy. I was on a coder call last week where they were talking about how, some very, very large institutions with a lot of significant federal funding found it very notable that they've not seen anything to date from NSF. So in terms of what we're doing in OSP when we receive a stop work order or termination, I want to emphasize first that it's a very case-by-case specific situation. Each award is going to be different, but at a high level, I want to outline some of the communication pieces that we are working on, and some of this I will readily admit is, we're learning on the fly on how to develop some of this and communicate out some of the details here, because they are very time dependent. Once we receive a stop work order, there's several steps that we need to immediately take to both communicate that out as well as to effectuate those changes onto the award in Huron and Workday. We also need to review if there are subawards. And if we do have subawards, we will immediately issue a stop work order to a subaward, irrespective of whether it's a stop work order or a termination. We'll just issue the stop work order immediately, and if it's a termination, we'll terminate the subawards once we draft up an agreement to terminate the award. But that sort of depends on what we're seeing at on the prime award. We are working on communicating that to the PI, to VPR leadership, to the OSP leadership team, as well as communicating that out to any internal grant line units that may have a grant line on a main award that is from a different unit within the university. So I think that's one lesson learned, that communicating that out more broadly to some of the folks that are impacted and will be impacted on the post-award side, making sure that they're aware that a determination has come through. There's also been some questions about the appeals process and how that works. That's going to depend on whether it's a grant or a contract. Broadly speaking, there may be the ability to appeal a termination, again, depending on whether it's a grant or a contract. It also depends on if we are the prime recipient. We would have the right of appeal. If there's a pass-through entity and we're a subrecipient, we do not have the right of appeal. They would have the right of appeal because they're the immediate recipient of the award. So those situations depend at the initial level. Those situations will dictate whether or not we even would have the right of appeal. And then it's a very case-by-case specific situation on whether or not UVA wants to exercise that right of appeal. I think first and foremost, it's a discussion with the PI. It's the PI's project, and they may have existing or future plans for future proposals, and they're not interested in an appeal. I've heard a range of different situations depending on, but I think first and foremost, wanting to get that input from the PI on what their view is on any sort of appeal. And then the process can go any number of different directions. It's still pretty early, and like I said, we have a limited number of terminations. And so I think it's a UVA leadership decision at that point on whether or not to appeal a given termination. Before we go into some of the Huron and Workday steps that we'll take when we get a stop work order or termination. Any questions thus far, just in terms of the high level overview, some of the communication steps that I'm describing? Okay, Sam, do you mind walking through some of the steps that we'll take when we do receive a stop work order or a termination to reflect that in Huron and then Workday?
Yeah, so once we confirm the authority of the stop work order, the pre-award setup team has to work very fast to make sure that we're updating the financial record appropriately. So for stop work orders in Huron, the end date on the financial setup page, that is being retracted. If the effective date on the order has passed, we need to use today's date, which is essentially the modified start date, the date that it's processed. We are not touching the funding amounts or allocations in Huron on and Workday for the stop work orders. Those are, being left as is. The same with the award calendar. For stop work orders specifically, we are leaving it as the full period of performance. However, I do want to emphasize that if we are receiving a firm termination from a sponsor, we are adjusting the award calendar to reflect the termination effective date. And respectively, the award to date, the end date would reflect today's date. Or if it's a situation where, let's say it is in a future effective date, we are reflecting that appropriately in our systems. A couple of items in terms of tracking and reporting in Huron. So for stop work orders, we are manually entering a special condition in Huron to track those. And the same if we are receiving these types of terminations, we are adding a manual term and condition to reflect those in Huron as well. In terms of the statuses, we are leaving those as is. So in a situation where, let's say, we have a stop work order and these life cycle status is spending on hold, pending sponsor approval, at risk, we are leaving those as is. So if it is a situation where the award is in an active state, the system will auto update to expired. And for stop work orders, we are not making any adjustments. Again, those would be made until we receive the full firm termination from the sponsor. In terms of how we're processing those specific actions, just because these actions need to occur pretty quickly in the system, awards that do have outgoing subawards, we are proceeding with adjusting those end dates. But again, it's a lot of communication between the pre-award, the subs team. If we are processing a stop work order that does have an outgoing subaward, we are communicating with Simon's team and initiating an AMR in Huron, so that, again, we can get that flow down notice immediately to any of the active subrecipients on the award. But that, in a nutshell, is how we are treating stop work orders, both in Huron and Workday, as well as some of these distinctions between those, the actual terminations versus the stop work orders. But again, it's been a lot of close communication between the pre-award, post-award, and outgoing subaward teams and the departments on these. And like Bill and Irmela have stated before, a lot of these are a case-by-case basis, just because of the nature of the specific nuances for projects. So, the caveat being we might have to make some adjustments to this.
Great, thanks, Sam. Yeah, Irmela, any other thoughts just on the sort of post-award closeout process, the steps that you all will take as far as charges once the termination has been received.
Sam did a great job in explaining how we are adjusting the dates of the award lines slash grants. So in some cases, we are receiving a retroactive notice with a stop work order effective date that is before today's date. So that's where we are going to have a little bit of difficulty because we received a stop work order effective 24th of March. No, 20th of March, but the order was issued to us on the 24th of March. So in this case, it's already too late to retract the grant date back in Workday. So now post-award folks will have to work with 24th of March as the end of period of performance, but manually remove the transactions that should not belong during the actual stop work order period. So that's going to be a little challenging for us. But if we receive a stop work order or a termination notice for a future period, we are good. Pre-award is taking care of the date, and we are just good to go with those dates. But post-award will have to have a lot of communication with the departments and figure out where to move the unallowed expenses to, unallocable expenses to. Now, the other thing, Bill, I just want to ask you, do we have a number of how many stop work orders were issued versus how many, termination notices?
So yeah, I mean it's right now it's 4 termination notices, 1 stop work order.
Okay.
And it's also worth noting that these obviously these change if new things come in, but we've had cases, one in particular where it was issued with a stop work order. This one was particularly interesting in that they lifted the stop work order and then provided a termination. We sort of conservatively, we were sort of skeptical about the lifting of the stop work order in that case, so we just left it on hold. But yeah, it's noteworthy that some are coming in as terminations, some are coming in as stop work orders, some are coming in as stop work orders turning into terminations. But yeah, it is important also to emphasize that the sort of number that we've seen is 1 currently under stop work order and 4 that have been terminated.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry. From the departmental perspective, can you outline how that communication would come to either the PI or the department on this stop order and termination? This is kind of a multi-purpose question, sorry. And then what that timeline is for obligations that are currently hitting a grant and who is responsible for removing those obligations, et cetera? Like, is it on the department level, like our post-award team here internally would do something to that level, or is it OSP's post-award team that is making the edits to the grants? Because I know that we've only had, like you said, Bill, 4 and 1. So we're not talking like there's a ton of them in the queue right now, but I think that there's so many questions about this potentially becoming a bigger thing, and how will we be communicated with, and what would the timeline for us on the department level be to get all of those commitments, and what about things and supplies that are in process and ordered, and all of those little pieces that go, along with a potential termination. I think a stop order is just kind of like we're stopping and we're holding until we hear more, but a termination is a termination, and you're basically closing out the grant, I'm guessing.
So I'll address kind of the initial communication
Right.
piece, and kick it to Irma on some of the charges questions. I think our goal is to immediately notify any of the both departmental and school level administrators that are impacted by a termination the day of we receive the termination. I think that's been thus far, I would say we've had some challenges with communicating that out in terms of getting everyone, particularly, like I said, there's an internal sub account for a different unit that could be impacted, will be impacted. So I think that's something that we're focused on communicating that out the day that we receive it, particularly because I mean, first, I want to underscore that these are really difficult communications to send out to PIs. But we also have to balance that with our need to move quickly in terms of the charges question. And so I think that's something that we've been working on to make sure that we're balancing that appropriately. And I'd say, in all honesty, we need to, yeah, we really need to focus on the timing relative to charges and getting the account to reflect a termination as quickly as possible. But yeah, I'd say at a high level, again, knowing that there are unique situations that can crop up award by award, our goal is to notify people as soon as they come in. We're also seeing these things at the end of the day too, and that makes it all the more tricky. Or, like Irmela said, after the fact, when we're pulling back. So it's a grab bag of different situations, but I think we are committed to trying to communicate that out to the impacted units so that they're at least aware initially that this has come through. And then there's a process of like, and we had this play out yesterday, for example, where a bunch of us jumped on a call real quick just to sort of get organized on, okay, here's what everybody's doing for moving charges, for communicating with subrecipients, closeout reporting timelines for technical reports, for financial reports, all of those pieces. So I think that's a good example of how it plays out well, where we're able to now that obviously gets challenging the larger the award. But at a high level, I think that's what we're shooting for. And then Irmela, do you have some thoughts on the charges question?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Kim. So we are controlling new expenses with the grant end date. So when there's a stop work order that's issued, the effective date will be the grant end date. We are not changing the life cycle status because we are allowing old expenses to still post. Example, your salary charges for the allowed period may post, the following month. So if we change the life cycle status to spending on hold, those charges will not post. So that's why we have decided that we are not going to change the life cycle statuses of the award lines. We are going to control new expenses with the grant line end date or award line end date. Now, for one of the termination notices from NIH, they gave us 90 days to close out the award. So again, the award end date is the effective date of the termination notice, but we left the grant open so that you can go ahead and post all allowable and allocable costs on the grant for the allowed period of performance. And then we are working with the department to prepare the FSR memo and then to submit our FFR. That's like, business as usual. For stop work orders, however, we are, using the award line end date again to control new expenses. And then when the order is lifted, depending on, what the new instructions are, if it's not terminated, then we continue business as usual. And pre-award will extend the grant line end date. So does that make sense? Did I answer your question, Kim?
You did. You actually created one more though. Sorry. So as you are speaking to your counterparts in other universities across the country, and I know that some universities has started receiving stop orders and terminations, I think sooner than
Oh,
we
yeah.
have. And I'm wondering, has anybody received communication from, I'm going to use the NIH in the sake of this conversation, from the NIH indicating a release of a stop order? Or like, are you seeing any kind of consistency that if a stop order should come to us, that we should be like, yeah, this is going to be it. Like, this is going to be the stop. Like, I'm anticipating a stop order would then potentially be followed by a termination notice. And
Bill,
possibly, right? But there would be, if they were going to lift that stop order or lift it with restrictions, or changes or, something to the grant. Are you hearing about any of those types of things happening in the communities?
I would say the trend is all towards termination. And so lifting of stop work order and the example that I cited where they said, yeah, your stop work order is rescinded. There's a lot of legal action happening and preliminary injunctions that are being sort of implemented and then reviewed on appeal. And so there's a lot of back and forth that the agencies are reacting to. I don't know specifically if our instance was in reaction to some of that, but just at a high level, if you think about some of the legal guidance that the agencies are reacting to, it's ping-ponging back and forth. I'm hesitant to characterize more specifically like that if we do receive a stop work order that it's sort of a fait accompli and it's all done, because it is very situation specific. But I will say, I'll reiterate what I mentioned earlier, that the trend across our peers is all towards termination, in terms of what they're seeing now from the federal agencies. So I'm not sure that's helpful, but I'm not sure, we can answer that directly. And I'd say if a stop work is received, the best we can do is, implement that on the financial system so that we are halting all charges. And then it's really a wait and see. I think for our one current example under a stop work order, it's COVID funding, so I expect it will be terminated, and it's just a timing thing. But again, I don't want to sort of characterize everything with a broad brush when it's all case by case specific.
Thank you very much. Both your answers were very helpful. Thank you.
Bill, there's a question for you.
Are there ALN funding opportunities which might be discontinued or split into multiple ALN funding opportunities? I mean, certainly there are certain ALNs that are being focused on because of the funding source. So, for example, going back to the COVID money example, we review ALNs regularly that are either reported on DHHS has a tracker of terminations that we're reviewing to see if there's any flow through implications to us, because some of these other institutions that are receiving significant numbers of stop work and terminations may not be processing those to us in a timely manner. And so, if some of these other schools are reporting, 30, 40, 50 terminations in a given week or so. And so we're trying to monitor kind of some of those ALNs, or more specifically looking at FANES on the pass-through side. I think when we're seeing ALNs that are referenced either from an agency or in reporting. We're trying to do our due diligence to see if there are impacts on our existing funding that we could expect, sort of anticipatory review of our current funding portfolio. But yeah, I could certainly see funding opportunities that can and have and will be discontinued in the future. And that's sort of that goes back to our initial guidance that we put out as far as proposals to make sure that people are reviewing the NOFO or any other proposal documentation on a regular basis for any changes. We've seen changes where dates have been changed or anything like that. So I don't know if that specifically addresses your question, Sai, but yes, we are seeing activity in that area.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Okay, I know we've got some other content on the agenda. Stephen, do you want to? I will say also, if you have separate other questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to discuss. But yeah, I want to kick it over to Stephen just for a quick update on the Huron changes related to the Office of Research Security.
Bill, hi everyone. First of all, thank you for your patience during the confusion about the research security warning message that was introduced to Research UVA with a recent patch. I think I just said recent like a million times in a row. Yeah, thank you. There was some confusion around like when and how we should communicate it. However, there are resources on the process available on the website, and so I'm here today to go over those really quickly. So, where can you find instructions? We have the process in three places currently. Well, why did I do that one? Oh, there we go. So the first place, if you go to Research UVA resources, Jamie with the training team has been updating those, and you will find them currently in the funding proposal creation guide, as well as the submitting an agreement guide. As well, we have it posted in the OSP blog. So what do you do if the message gets triggered when you add a sponsor to a funding proposal or another record in Research UVA? So when you get the message, you're going to create an ancillary review. When you create the review, you're going to select Foreign Influence Research Security as the organization, the review type as other, what the yes for response required, and then you can leave comments about the fact that you saw the message and that you're sending it for review. So pretty easy. The review needs to happen anytime that the sponsor is added to a record in Research UVA. So and a record count, the funding proposal, agreement, and award are all records. So when do you need to use it? Because if it's popping up every time you put it into a record, do you need to send a ancillary review every time? It depends. There's a rule of thumb to follow. So basically, the goal of the review is to review the entity in relation to the current project and at the current moment in time. So some examples. So say that you have an agreement that just that the entity was reviewed and that agreement is being transformed into an award. In that case, we have a current project, the agreement that was recently reviewed. So basically at the current moment in time. So it would not need to be reviewed again when that award is created. However, say that you have a project, the sponsor was reviewed, but you're doing an amendment. In this case, we can look at our rule of thumb. Is it the current project? Potentially, but probably not. A modification would mean that you're making a change. So it's not necessarily the current project. Additionally, the current moment in time, if it's a modification, then the project has already been going on for some time. And essentially, yes, a review would be needed in this case. If you have any questions about whether the review is necessary or about the process, you can email questions to ospnoa@virginia.edu. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I know we're short on time, so I want to hand it off to Erica and Jamie to talk about some of the research UVA enhancements.
Thank you so much. So just really quickly, I'm going to introduce the team in case we need a reintroduction. I think we did this a while back at a RAF meeting. So go ahead to the next slide, Jamie. So we've got a training and communications team, and it includes myself, Marina Muchnick, Jamie Petrasic, and Stephen Cooley. So you guys will be hearing a lot more from us in the near future and right now. Especially Jamie and Stephen. Marina's in charge of more of the IRB training right now, and so she has a lovely workshop that you are more than welcome to take. It isn't quite targeted at the research administrator group, but there are some relevant things if you want to learn more about human subjects research. If you go to the next slide, we have a training website. If you want to go to this website, it's linked here. It'll be in the slides, and you can bookmark it. Anytime we're offering something new, that'll be linked here. There's a calendar. So if it's a live session and there's a calendar option there, you can just look and see when the next offering is. So for instance, the Human Subjects 101 course is on that if you want to look at when the next offerings are. And then we are all working on, Jamie and Marina and I are all working on some exciting other workshops that will be offered in the future. And so we'll announce those through things like Stephen's blog post and the Spotlight newsletter. We'll come to this meeting to announce those opportunities, but they'll also be on the website. But primarily, I would like to also introduce Jamie. She's going to talk about some of the Huron upgrades coming up. And so I'll let her take it from here.
Thank you, Erica. Hey, everybody. So we don't have a lot of time. I tend to speak fast anyway, being from New Jersey, but I will do my best to not speak too fast, but to get us out of here so that you can all eat lunch. So Intro to Huron Update 10.5. Very exciting news. Huron is updating. A lot of you are used to Huron patches, but this is actually a larger update. So the entire research suite to include the grants, which includes 424 forms, the agreements, and the COI module will receive an update. So I will go through just a little bit of information. This is a pretty high level. There's going to be a lot more information coming. All right, so what can end users expect? So end users can expect the following. There's going to be changes that you may find noticeable as an end user, but they don't really affect your day-to-day. A really good example of that is the 424 form updates. Those form pages have to be updated so we can submit accurate and complete applications to federal sponsors. There's also going to be some back-end info team changes that, quite frankly, really none of us will notice. And then some updates that are really specific to OSP Central staff that you may notice as a change, but it doesn't really affect your day-to-day. Again, there will be some noticeable user interface changes that require advanced planning, additional guidance documentation, and training. And rest assured, we are all working on that now. And then we'll talk a little bit more as we get through the slides about a couple big ticket item changes that are much larger in scope. Of course, there will be training for that as well. So let's go over a couple. I just have some screenshots for you all of some examples. So this is a really good example here of an agreements change, a change in the agreements module that as an end user in the field, you may not notice at all. You may notice it, but it's really a central OSP enhancement, I would say. So a couple of these states that we have in the agreement section, you can see there's pre-upgrade and post-upgrade. So right now, routing for signature is what the button is used, pressed when an agreement negotiator sends a signature off for internal signature. So Bill, Stuart, Sharon. That is going to change. The state is going to change to internal signature. It's just a little bit easier to kind of know where the agreement is. If you've got internal or external signature versus out for signature, routing for signature, that could mean either one, right? So it's just a nice enhancement, I would say. And this is a second screenshot of that same enhancement just to show you that the buttons for the person who is reviewing and sending it out for signature, it changes there too. So instead of send out for signature, send for external signature. And then another screenshot of the difference up here in the state. So, all right, so this is a little bit of a bigger change. This is a user interface change example also on the agreements module. The ancillary review section is actually moving. So as you can see, the top screenshot pre-upgrade, the ancillary reviews show right above the group of tabs. That is changing. The ancillary reviews will actually get their own tab, and anyone who has access to the agreement will be able to review that entire ancillary review tab with all of the documents, all of the comments that are left. This is a screenshot of another university, so we have tried to take out as much identifying information as we could, but we have grit and can find things when we need them. All right, so here's another one here. This is another, so this goes along with the ancillary reviews. This is on the grants side. So post-upgrade, the manage ancillary review activities will be exposed in all of the workflow states on both awards and award mods. And it will look similar to that agreement slide that I just showed where it's got its own tab, which again, will be a really nice enhancement. And then finally, I'm talking faster than I can click. Finally, this is going to be a little bit of a big one. Just-in-time changes is the current nomenclature and is the current button in Huron, right? Just-in-time is a pretty NIH specific term, so that is changing with the upgrade 10.5.6, which is included in 10.5, to post-submission updates. So that button will change, and the communications that get sent out when you click the button will also change. That terminology will follow into those communications. So again, this will be a pretty big change. Everyone, I imagine, will notice this. Even if you don't use it, you'll notice it looks different on the side. And we're tracking all of that and creating guidance documents around that too. I spoke earlier about a couple of larger changes. So we're calling them big ticket items. And as my friend Vonda likes to say, we like to make sure that big ticket items are ready for prime time. So the steering committee is really looking closely at a lot of these big ticket items. And the three that are the biggest, I would say, one, the funding proposal budget can allow an enhancement to budget for person months instead of, or in addition to, percent effort. So that's a pretty big change, right? So that is all being reviewed. There will be training guidance documents around that and training. There also is an enhancement that allows for an additional certify button. Right now, the PI certifies the proposal. Any other faculty that sign off, they go through the ancillary review process. There is an option to turn on an additional certify button for other faculty. That's being looked at as well. And finally, the tagging feature that is available on the funding proposal side is also going to be available on the agreement side. And that's being looked at too, because again, everybody's got to take a close look at this, make sure that we can actually be ready for it when it gets turned on, right? So, this is a tentative timeline. It's a pretty good timeline. So go live will happen this summer, but the date is TBD. You can expect super user sessions in early April, a draft of a change guide for end users mid-April, user acceptance testing, April 21st through May 30th, training sessions beginning in June, office hours after go live, so we can keep training, keep getting those questions, keep refining. And then communications throughout, through blog updates, newsletters, spotlight meetings. So we encourage you to subscribe to the monthly newsletter and to always check out that OSP blog. You can bookmark it. It's a great place to check things out. And then finally, Mary Beth would like some volunteers for these super user sessions and for user acceptance testing. Core team, you're volunteers already. So wait and see for an email coming to your inbox. But other folks, we are opening this up. We would love to have you. It's really important we get everybody's feedback and get people in a room to help us out with this. So please email Mary Beth if you are interested. And it is 11:59. So do you have any questions? I see questions in the chat.
That's just me spamming links, I think.
Okay, I love that. That's an easy question. Thank you. All right, I have no questions. Lots more to come on this, everybody. So thank you for listening to me talk really fast, and email Mary Beth if you have specific questions or would like to be a super user.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Erica, anything else from the training team?
That's it
Okay.
for
All right.
today.
Well, thanks everyone for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.